Hello, 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 my peeps. I'm so glad to have you here on Biblio Files today, and you're not going to believe my guest. Matter of fact, she and I have so much to talk about that we are doing 2 segments of the show with Wendy H. Jones. That H is very important if you want to find her book, so I wanted to stress that. And she is here today to speak to us from a standpoint that's very unique to a lot of the people that we've talked to so far, in that she is traditionally published and she is also self-published, and she also has multiple series, and she also has a great deal of experience in just so many areas. I want you to welcome my guest, Wendy H. Jones, to the show. Welcome, Wendy. We're so glad to have you today.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to join you in the United States. I can travel the world without leaving my lounge.
Isn't it wonderful? And, you know, I think that probably the most brilliant thing about technology today is how it brings us all together.
Yeah.
Right? Well, and especially right now with the whole COVID thing and all that, where we're supposed to be distancing and all that, which we're doing because we're trying to do what's right. It's
yes.
really nice to be able to just sit here and have this nice face-to-face conversation between us and my peeps. And I am excited to talk to you today because you are kind of one of the shining stars out there, as far as someone that authors who are just starting their journey can follow, and even experienced authors can learn from. So please take a moment. One of the things I'm excited about is Wendy and I are both fellow veterans of the armed forces. And so we have a few things in common. And we got a few gray hairs in common as well, which is cool. But just give us some background real quick about, number one, you know, kind of a little bit about your journey so far and the genres that you are involved in right now.
Yeah. Well, I came to being an author through an unusual background. I was a nurse in both the Royal Navy and the Army, and I ended up as the head of pre-registration nurse education for the Army, Navy and Air Force. So I was writing for academic journals. It was expected of me. And then I left and I went into academia. I was working at universities and I was working in teacher training. And again, I was writing for academic journals and textbooks. But then I got very ill, and with my lungs, I was very, very, very ill for a long time. I spent a long time in hospital, and I was registered disabled. So I moved back to Scotland. I thought, oh, life's too short for all of this. I'm going to go back to Scotland. So I moved back to Scotland and found 2 things quite quickly out. One, that a military pension isn't enough it's enough to live on, but it's not enough to swan around the world on. And I was used to swanning around the world. And second thing I found was it's a bit boring retiring when you're young. You know, you want to do something. So a friend of mine was on a radio show, and I phoned her up, and she's a publisher. And I said, oh, what would be your advice to a new writer on air? And this is where I discovered she was American. Excuse me. And excuse my rubbish American accent, okay? But she said, oh, you need to do NaNoWriMo. And I was like, what's NaNoWriMo? So she explained, and it's National Novel Writers Month for anyone that doesn't know. And I thought, oh, I'll go and have a look at that. Went and had a look, not realizing that meant I was signing up to it. So I signed up, and being Scottish, we're very feisty. I thought, well, I've got to do this now. I've got to write the book. So I wrote the book. I did the 50,000 words for NaNoWriMo. I wrote the book and thought, what do I do now? Oh, I'll let a few people read it. So I gave it to my mother and my mother was dead, sorry. I gave it to my aunt and a friend of mine, and a lovely publisher in America who I didn't even know. She was an editor, a publisher, proofreader, and she said, oh, I'll look at it for you. I literally didn't know her. We weren't even friends on Facebook. It was just something that had been said in a conversation. She said, I'll look at the first 10 chapters. I thought, oh, well, she'll give me feedback. So they all came back saying, this is really good. And the lady in America said, this is really good. I want to the rest. I'll do it for you for nothing. Okay. So I sent it to her, and she did all that. And she said, all 3 of them said, this is really good. but the ending's rubbish, which I knew it was rubbish, to be honest. I knew it was rubbish. So I worked on it. I had it re-edited. I had it professionally edited. I had people look at it. And then I went and I approached a few publishers, and the publishers weren't, yeah, well, it's okay. One couple turned it down. One said, well, we could look at it, but it'll be 3 or 4 years before we get round to publishing it. And I'm a frightfully impatient soul. So I thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll bring it out anyway. So I hired a professional cover designer and did it all professionally, set up a publishing company, Scott and Lawson, and I then brought the book out. Well, it turned out everybody loved it. It went nuts. Everybody loved it. Dundee Libraries took 25 copies. That was the next day, the day after it came out. There was over 100 people at the book launch at Waterstone's bookshop, which is the equivalent of Barnes & Noble in the UK. And it was like, this is manic. The book was just selling. It was flying off the shelves. So I thought, well, this is going well. I might as well bring the next one out because I've written it. So I'll get that edited. And the third one, because I've written that in the meantime. So they all came out. Within a year, I'd brought out the first 3 in that series. And people just loved it. They thought D.I. Shona Mackenzie rocked. They really liked the books. They were selling really well. Waterstones thought it was awesome. I was doing well on Amazon. I was, and I thought, this is amazing. So I then was approached by a publisher, a young adult publisher, who said, have you got an idea for a young adult series? And I said, oh, yes. I'm very good at saying yes. I said, oh, yes. So I said yes, and then thought, I better think of something and pitch it to her. So I did. And 3 days later, I got a 3-book contract for the Ferguson Flora Mysteries. And there's 2 of them out at the moment. I've now got the rights to them back because the publisher has moved back to Australia. So, but before I've even had time to bring them out myself, another publisher wants to look at them. So they're away with another publisher now. So then I thought, oh, well, this is good. I think I might write a cozy mystery. I love Janet Ivanovic. Have you heard her Stephanie Plum series? Janet Ivanovic is Stephanie Plum series. Stephanie Plum is useless. Absolutely useless, everything she does. She's a bail bondswoman and she runs around America blowing up cars and, she's hopeless. And I thought, but she's really funny. And I thought, I could do a Scottish version of this, I think. So I came up with Cass Claymore, who's a red-headed motorbike riding ex-ballerina who inherits a private detective agency and accidentally hires an ex-con dwarf and an octogenarian. I thought, that sounds funny. So I brought that out and it was doing really well. People thought it was really funny. And then I was asked to write a children's picture book. Now, going back to what I said, I'm very good at saying yes. I don't seem to understand the word no. So I was asked to write this picture book and I said yes, but with a caveat, only if I can get a publisher. The second publisher I approached took it on. So Bertie the Buffalo was born. And that's the way my career's gone. It's been amazing. I was the webmaster for the Association of Christian Writers for 5 years. I've just recently, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, stood down from that because it was time for someone else to have a crack at the whip, really, and bring in some fresh ideas. Sometimes we hang on to things for too long. I'm the president of the Scottish Association of Writers. I'm the secretary for the Society of Authors in Scotland. I used to run my own radio show. Now I run my own podcast instead for various reasons, a lot of it to do with coronavirus. And I'm an international public speaker and a writing coach, and I run workshops for writers. And just if that's not enough, I'm actually building a course on marketing. I also have two non-fiction books, but we're going to talk about them later.
Yeah, so just kind of sitting around not doing a whole lot in your retirement, right?
No, well, this is that I was bored. Anyway, to cut a long story short, because I've given you the very long story, I'm not ill anymore either. That's the other thing. Somehow or other, I miraculously recovered my lung prowess and I could breathe and I was getting oxygen in and all was well. So, I'm not disabled anymore and I'm running around crazy writing books. I'm loving it.
That is so awesome. That gives me great hope for my future and the future of others who are out there. And I think that we need to hear those kinds of stories, that it's not all just kind of slogging around. That for me, the writing process was such a miracle. It's something I wanted to write starting in my high school years. I
Yeah.
wanted to be a novelist. And that was my thing. And then I went in the military, and then I met my husband, and we had children, and we traveled all over the place. And so 2 weeks before my 65th birthday, I published the first book in the series, and there's since been 3. I just turned 66, so I did 3 books in 12 months, similar to you. And now I'm at the stage where I'm going, okay, so I'm already writing book 4, but people need to discover what I've written. And so how do I do that? And so we're going to talk about that in the next segment.
But I can give you lots of advice on that.
I am definitely going to be having some long conversations with you, hopefully in the future. But so you've got, what made you decide to write in the crime genre?
In fact, I've just realized I didn't actually tell you what my first series was called. I told you about everything else, but not that. It's called The Detective Inspector Shona Mackenzie Mysteries. Yeah. So D.I. Shona Mackenzie Mysteries. And the reason I wrote in crime was because I was an early reader. I started reading when I was 3. I joined the library when I was 3, which was impossible in Scotland at that point. But my mother somehow or other managed to convince the most draconian librarian in the whole history of the world. She still puts fear and trembling through the whole of Dundee, including all the librarians who are still there. And as a shout out to all the librarians in Dundee, they're absolutely delightful, as are the ones in Angus. And the ones I met in America when I was there, they're all delightful. This lady was very old school. This was a long time ago. Anyway, my mother managed to convince her that I needed to join the library. Well, by the time I was 10, I'd read my way through every single book in the children's library. And it was things like, I read everything, but I read The Secret 7, Famous 5. I read The Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, all those mystery ones, as well as all the school stories and, Millie Molly Mandy and The Folk of the Faraway Tree. I read everything and anything, including all the adult books that were lying around at home, because in those days, nobody cared what you read. You're a bit more careful now because of the content of some of them. But in those days, it was fine. Anyway, by the time I was 10, my mother was back down the library saying, you might want to give her an adult library card. So off we went on another argument, and my mother won it. And I ended up with an adult library card and moved on to the likes of Simenon. You might not have heard of him in America, but everybody's heard of Agatha Christie, the wonderful Agatha Christie. I'd moved on to Sherlock Holmes, all those ones. I was reading every mystery I could get my hands on. I read other things as well, like Danielle Steele and people like that, but my big love was always mystery, crime, that type of actual story. So to be honest, it was a natural progression, really, because to be a writer, you first need to be a reader. And you need to, not only do you need to read in the genre that you're writing in, you need to read widely. Well, that's me. But my biggest love was crime. So I know all about it. So it was easier to write that. And it was what sprang to mind.
Okay, well, and that's fair enough. That's very similar to my background. I got introduced to science fiction in junior high school, but I've been reading since I was 4. And so my mom that's what we did, was we went to the library. My earliest memories are, there's that smell. Libraries have a certain aroma.
They do.
You notice that? It's the smell of books and the ink and all of that. And I used to say that if somebody ever decided to make a perfume that was ode to library, I would totally wear it.
The libraries and bookshops have an aroma all of their own.
They do. They do. And it's just something so magical about a library. And librarians, I've been friends with librarians ever since I can remember, because I spent so much time there. Matter of fact, I remember in high school, if the librarian was busy, people would come and see me. I had the Dewey Decimal System memorized, and I knew where everything was in the library. But so I think that's such an important thing, is the things we read and the things we get fascinated by early on definitely influences genres we write in. And so how different was it for you to switch from crime and mystery to writing a children's book?
Well, that was something else again, because I'd never written, I mean, to be honest, I don't even have kids. I was a children's nurse, just to add. So I do know about children's books. It's not come out of left field completely. But I literally had to, when I agreed to do this and got a publishing contract, I literally had to go and buy a load of children's books to read them and get the flavour of what they are. And fortunately, I have friends who are extremely good children's writers. They write in Scotland. And it was a whole new learning experience, though, because first of all, I wrote the story. Then my publisher said, we'd rather like it in rhyme. Rhyme? I didn't think rhyme was the thing these days, because everybody's fallen out with rhyme because it's too difficult when it comes to foreign translation. But no, rhyme it was. So apparently rhyme's making a huge comeback because parents love it. So I did it in rhyme.
So much more fun to read.
It is. And to be honest, it is better when you're reading it because you get the cadence. Because I'll give you the first verse of Bertie the Buffalo is, Bertie the Buffalo was really, really wee. He galloped round the paddock, giddy with glee. Bertie was the smallest of the animals on the farm. He didn't even reach to the farmer's arm. So the rhyme gives it a cadence, it gives it an interest, you can put more into it. Whereas if you're reading that straight, Bertie the Buffalo was really, really wee. He galloped round the paddock, he was giddy with glee. And Bertie was the smallest of the animals on the farm, and he didn't even reach the farmer's arm. It doesn't have the same tone. So
and
rhyme
it draws you through.
Absolutely. Yeah, it draws you from verse to verse. But then the fun and games started, because this was released in Britain and then 3 months later in America. And I did not believe how difficult it is to get a children's book into America with Scottish words in it. It can be hard. Anyway, I had to take all reference to Mummy and Daddy out, because there was no way the American publishing houses were taking it on with Mummy instead of Mommy. And there was absolutely no way I could use Mommy in a book that's published in Britain and set in Scotland. So literally all references to Mummy and Daddy were taken out and something else was put in. Because it is, now the one thing I did get to keep in, and I thought an explanation would have gone in, but I think the pictures speak for itself. I said he was jumping over dry stone dikes, yeah, which is a dry stone wall. It's a wall in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And apparently everybody agreed it could stay, because you have to think, this is the thing, you've got to think, how is it going to go down in other countries, you know? So I was very fortunate, and luckily he's been very popular in both sides of the pond. So,
you know, well, I just thought it was absolutely, completely, and utterly charming, and the kind of book. I think it's really important when you're writing a children's book to recognize that somewhere along the line there's going to be an adult reading it to the child, and it should be just as much fun for the adult as it is for the child, because they will read it with more expression and they will enjoy reading it over and over and over again.
The other thing you have to think about with a children's book, and I'd never thought of this either, the commas, although some of them are grammatically correct, they're not in the grammatically correct places. The middle comma is the Bertie the Buffalo, comma, was really, really wee. That works. But in other places, it's before an and, which you wouldn't do in Britain. You wouldn't do commas round ands. But you have to do it for the breath pauses so that the rhyme works. And the other thing is you have to try and keep the same beat all the way through. And I'll admit, in order to get a beat that worked, I went and got another children's book. I had bought some by that point, so I got one off my shelf that would rhymed, and I went da 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 da, and I literally wrote down da 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 and did the verse in da da da, and then I made sure every single verse I wrote fitted into that da 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 da. Yeah. Yep. Then you have to have repetitive phrases. Mm-hmm. So all through the book it goes, but Bertie kept on running really, really fast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love that, the repetitiveness, that's important actually in a child's book. So I caught on to something that you said and realized something about my own writing. I have this issue with commas. When I have editors come in and look at my books, and even Word is constantly criticizing my use of commas, but I have a tendency to think of how it would be when somebody said it as opposed to what the legal use of commas is. And so, it's like, why did you put a comma there? Well, that's where somebody would normally take a breath. And so, but it doesn't go there. Okay, well, fine. Okay.
It doesn't work in adult books, because somebody's reading it and not reading it out loud, then it's grammatically correct.
Right.
In the rhyming book, it's where you would pause for the beat. So Bertie the buffalo was really, really wee, because if you just do that line without the short pause, it doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I was just realizing that that's why I have the issues I do, because I have a tendency to hear it in my head as I'm writing. And as a speaker, I put when I'm writing a talk, I put commas to remind myself where to pause. As a singer, we put commas in places in music to remind the singer to pause there. So it's just kind of a thing that I've got to eventually get over, because it keeps getting corrected over and over and over again. Okay, so you talk about the commas and all this. I think a lot of young authors, I spent a lot of time in the NaNoWriMo group myself. That's how I got started as well. It's a great jump start. If you really want to get started writing and you've got some ideas, it's a great place to just jump start, and it teaches you the discipline necessary to become a real writer, because you have to write every single day in order to do that 50,000 words. And it teaches you to set goals and all those kinds of things. It's not just about sitting there and waiting for the muse to perch on your shoulder, so to speak. But at any rate, in that process, I meet a lot of young authors who think that they're going to write a novel and get it published in 90 days. And it's like, no, not really. Talk about the process from the time that you finish the book until the time that it's published. What is it that people need to keep in mind about writing a book that people will actually read?
Well, first of all, you never show your first draft to anybody. Your first draft is for you. It's not for anyone else. It's not for your friends. It's not for people to give it a quick read to see how it's doing. It's not for that at all. Your first draft is for you. So once you've done your first draft, you then rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it and polish it and edit it and rewrite it and polish it and edit it and rewrite it until you're happy that it's a polished document. Then you send it to someone else to edit, and you can have developmental editors who will tell you if the whole thing works. If you know, for example, in my first book, I'd completely forgotten to investigate one of the murders. Even after rewriting it, and somebody said, Wendy, you've got a murder swinging in the wind. They were heard about it and they've never actually done anything about it. They just shrugged their shoulders and went, oh, another murder, and I went, oh. So you need to do that. So that's what your developmental editor does. You have a line editor who makes sure to go through it line by line to make sure that it all goes together, that everything works. You have a proofreader to make sure that your commas are in the right place, to make all of that before you then do anything else with it. Now, can I just say, even after it's been through all that process, somebody somewhere will pick up a typo or a comma in the wrong place, or it doesn't matter whether you're self-published or whether you're the most prolific published author in the world. Somebody will pick up that you've done something wrong. For example, I know one author where a reader said, do you know that your detective's eye color changes from book 1 to book 4? Yeah. And that's a really big writer. And he just went, oh, did it? Okay.
But she got contacts.
Who knows,
Right?
you know, but things happen. Things will drop through the net. It's not the end of the world. People get very hung up on, yes, I agree, you need to get rid of them all. You need to get rid of them all. And if you're told about them and you're able to get rid of them, that's fabulous, yeah? But one or two will drop through. But when you do all that, now there's two roads you can go down. You can either decide to independently self-publish, or you can look for a publisher. Now, if you're looking for a publisher, for any of the big publishers, you will need an agent. That's the bottom line. You will need an agent to pitch to them. So you need to look for an agent, and then they will pitch it to the big publishers, and you may or may not get a publishing deal. That's it. Yeah, it can
A
be
couple
hard.
of quick
Yeah.
cautions about that, I think it's really important to bring out. An agent is never going to charge you to be their agent, right?
Not until the book is published. Then they get 15%. Or usually, I can't say what's going to be in your contract. It could be 30%, I don't know, but it's usually 15% of whatever you earn, 15% of your advance, 15% of your royalties. They will get that.
Right.
Yeah?
Because there are a lot of people who claim to be agents who want to charge you sometimes thousands of dollars up front.
No.
And that you should never, ever go with that.
No, absolutely not. That's not the way to go. Yeah. So you may or may not get a publishing deal. Some of the smaller publishers will work with agents, but they'll also let you pitch them directly. Or you can independently or self-publish. And again, you do that professionally. I would advise people, if they're going down that route, to join the Alliance of Independent Authors. Mm-hmm. Ally are an absolutely outstanding organization. I've pretty much been with them since the get-go, because they set up just as I was starting out, and I joined straight away. I've been a member. I'm now an entrepreneur member of Alliance of Independent Authors, and the advice you get there is second to none. It's
amazing. Absolutely amazing. It's probably one of the biggest things that I rely on as I'm going through my journey as a brand new person in this industry, because these are people who've been there, done that. And when you ask a question, they say, well, when I did this, this happened. It's not theory. It's all exactly, and you can put a question out to the group and say, well, what do you think about this particular promotion thing? Or what do you think about that? And they'll tell you if it's a scam or not. I don't do anything, sign anything, pay anything until I've gone to Allie and looked through the various discussions to see if they're mentioned. And if not, then I ask. And they are so generous with their advice and whatnot. It's totally worth my yearly subscription price to be part of that.
They're brilliant. The other people, if you're going down the independent route, that you should join is the Society of Authors. Yeah. And again, they will represent your interests. I have all my contracts checked by them. Yeah, before I sign them, I get them checked by the Society of Authors, who will say, change this, or ask if you can change that, or, they will advise you. They're extremely good. They put a lot of things on for authors. So the Society of Authors, if you're going down the traditional route, the Alliance of Independent Authors, if you're going down the independent route. If you're going down the independent route, remember that you're not one person. Independent doesn't mean on your own. What it means is that you are running an independent publishing company where you will hire an editor, you will hire a proofreader, you will hire a cover designer. If you do that all on your own, usually, and I'm not saying this is always the case, so please don't think I'm dissing anybody, usually it means if you do it all on your own that you're putting out shoddy work. You're putting out a shoddy product, you're giving yourself a bad name, you're giving everybody else a bad name, and it's not a good way to go. Hire the professionals that know what they're doing. My cover designer is absolutely worth every single penny I can give her. Her knowledge on branding is second to none. She came up with the first cover. I loved it. And she's branded the covers all the way through. She is outstanding. And I would not regret one penny I pay her. Yeah, because she's so good. And it works, because I've been at book signings and people have come straight up to me and they've gone, my goodness, these covers just attracted me. I had to see what you were doing.
Right.
You know,
You love that when you get those kind of comments. I have an amazing cover designer myself, and he's just done such great work. Probably the one thing that you're saying is that as an author, whether you're an independent or traditionally published author, it's a business. And you need to treat it as
100%.
such.
It's a business. And you need to be professional. You need to approach it professionally, and you need to treat everybody professionally. And I'm probably slipping over into the second part of this interview, and I don't want to do that.
No, that's preview of coming events, folks. We're going to talk about that in the next segment.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you can go down two routes, and it's entirely up to you what you want to do. Nobody can tell you what to do. And it's the beauty of it. Let's face it, what we're all trying to do, whether we're traditionally published or whether we're independently published, what we're trying to do is bring out a book that readers want to read and that they love. And
exactly.
That's what it's about. We're not at each other's throats. We're not one or the other. We're all writers. We're all authors. We're all trying to do our best for our readers. Yeah.
And that's why these writers groups work so much better than a lot of the marketing groups that I've been part of, is because we're not in competition. Because let's face it, how many books can any of us put out in a year, right? Our readers, the people who really love books, they read sometimes a book every week or sometimes a couple of books every week. There's no way we could satisfy that demand. So it's in our best interest to promote one another.
Absolutely.
And to give our readers plenty of reasons to keep coming back.
Yeah,
and it starts with being professional, but we also need to recognize that the author community is this organism. It's amazing, and modern technology gives us the ability to communicate. I think back to Tolkien's Inklings.
Oh yeah.
And that little group that they had that met every week, and they sat down and they discussed what they were writing and chided one another and they did a lot of proofreading of each other's work and all that kind of stuff. And it's like my beta readers. I have this amazing group of beta readers who are so encouraging to me and so helpful, and my editor and my book cover artist. It's a team effort. You don't know writer is an island. Not if you really want to ever, write something that people want to read.
Can I say something very quickly about the Society of Authors? The Society of Authors, who are a union for authors, they actually say that you can join them if you're independently published as well. They have a criteria to join, and the criteria are you have to have sold 300 paperbacks or 500 ebooks in the first year. I mean, to be honest, I joined them within about a week of bringing my first book out, so I was fine. And that's the only criteria for self-published authors to join, If you meet those criteria, you can join, And they will represent, they say there's absolutely no difference now. They will not treat anybody differently because they're independently published or they're traditionally published. And that's the Society of Authors, who are the people that represent authors in the UK. And that just shows you how mainstream it is now, that people are not being discriminated against.
Well, and there's a lot, if I remember right, there are authors like the author of Twilight, for instance, and several others who are now traditionally published authors and even have some movies out there and all these kinds of things that started out as independent authors.
Absolutely.
So you just never really know, what's going to go on. For me, the delight is when I have someone who comes to get one of my books signed and they say, I can hardly wait till this next book comes out because it was so good. And what that does for me, because that was my goal, is I wanted to share a story that would bring some delight and joy in somebody's life. And I think that's what drives us, isn't it, really, when it comes down to it? I did an interview with Mercedes Lackey once, and she said, one of the first things she said to me was, don't ever expect to make any money as a writer. And what she meant by that was that can't be your prime motivation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I took that to heart and said, okay, so I won't expect to make $1 million with the very first book that goes out, which was a good idea because I certainly didn't. But I got such great feedback from my readers and whatnot. So the next step for me, and this is the segue into our next segment of this, is how do I find people so that they know that the book is even out there? Because of there's so many books published every single day on Amazon and in traditional publishing. And how do you have people find your book? So Wendy and I are going to disconnect for just a moment here, and we're going to continue this in our next segment. So please, Wendy H. Jones. She is an amazing author. She's done some amazing things. If you have kids, get Birdie the Buffalo. It is so darn cool.
If you're in the States, apparently Barnes and Noble have both the book and the soft toy. Someone told me the other day.
So, and that's one of the things I want to talk about in our next segment is your toy. So at any rate, thank you, Wendy. This has been just brilliant. You know, you're awesome.
It's been amazing being on.
So thanks, and peeps. All right. So your job is to like, to comment, and to share this with somebody that you know who might be able to benefit from all the brilliant information that Wendy's been able to provide us today. And don't miss the next episode, okay? All right. Talk to you later.